Lena Dalton claimed her husband Eric slipped and fell to his death during a scenic hike. But when investigators checked Lena's smartwatch, it revealed a timeline that didn't match her tearful story. Hidden behind a grieving widow's mask was a chilling betrayal. And beside her, a secret lover named Cameron Boyd, whose voice would ultimately expose the truth. Lena and Eric Dalton were the kind of couple people envied. They had met during a charity marathon 5 years ago and bonded instantly over their love for the outdoors. From that day on, their relationship unfolded like a travel magazine spread. Their social media pages were filled with sun-drenched hiking trails, romantic selfies taken at cliff edges, and videos of them laughing in tents beneath starlit skies. Friends described them as inseparable, the kind of pair that seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company even without the presence of others. They weren't rich, but they had what many believed was true happiness. Eric was a quiet, kind-hearted man who worked as a mechanical engineer before being laid off earlier that year. Lena, on the other hand, was an energetic entrepreneur trying to grow an online lifestyle brand. They shared a modest 2-bedroom house in Eugene, Oregon, and often spent weekends exploring the nearby forests and mountains. With autumn in full bloom, October offered perfect hiking conditions, and Bear Creek Trail was one of their favorite spots. It was steep in areas but offered stunning views, waterfalls, and just enough challenge to keep it exciting. On a crisp Sunday morning, the Daltons packed their gear, filled their water bottles, and set off in their Subaru Outback. They reached the trailhead just before 10 a.m. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the trail was empty, as most hikers avoided the more difficult routes. The couple signed the trail register, noting their names and estimated return time. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Lena would later recount that the day had been going perfectly. They had stopped halfway up to take pictures of the changing leaves and shared sandwiches on a large flat rock near a ridge. But sometime around 2 p.m., things took a tragic turn. According to Lena, they were nearing the summit when Eric decided to walk out onto a narrow ledge to get a better view. She said she begged him to stay back, but he insisted, saying he just wanted a quick look. She claimed she turned her head for only a moment, just long enough to grab her phone from her backpack. That's when she heard the rocks give way, followed by a loud thud and silence. Panicked and disoriented, she said she scrambled down the slope to find Eric lying motionless at the base of a shallow cliff. His head was turned at an unnatural angle, his body twisted among the rocks. He couldn't find a pulse. She screamed for help, but the forest was silent. With no cell signal, Lena claimed she spent nearly an hour trying to make her way back to the trailhead, getting turned around several times in her panic. When she finally reached the ranger's station, her face was covered in scratches, her leggings torn at the knees, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She was crying, almost incoherent. Search and rescue teams were deployed immediately. 2 hours later, they found Eric's body exactly where Lena had described. The cliff was roughly 20 feet high, not a sheer drop, but enough to kill someone if they landed badly. The coroner confirmed multiple blunt force injuries, including severe trauma to the head and chest. The cause of death was labeled as an accidental fall. The case was closed that same night. The town mourned the tragic loss of a man they described as gentle and thoughtful. Social media flooded with condolences. Lena's posts turned somber. Photos of Eric paired with heartfelt captions about love, grief, and how life can change in an instant. She held a quiet memorial a week later, attended by close friends and family. People brought flowers and warm food, and they cried together in the Daltons' cozy living room. But while the community grieved and tried to move on, something about the story didn't sit right with a junior detective assigned to the report. Nothing major, just a few small inconsistencies. And when the sheriff's office reviewed the personal items collected at the scene, a standard scan of Lena's smartwatch data revealed something that made investigators stop in their tracks. The numbers didn't lie. The data suggested that what happened on that hiking trail may not have been an accident at all. When Lena Dalton returned from Bear Creek Trail alone, she appeared every bit the grieving widow. Her face showed signs of distress, and her recounting of the day was detailed but believable. She had said all the right things to the first responders, and the emotional weight she carried seemed to match her story. She explained how Eric had gone ahead on the path, how the cliff had crumbled beneath him, and how she had desperately tried to reach him before running for help. On the surface, there was nothing particularly suspicious. Tragic accidents happened often in remote wilderness areas, and Bear Creek had been the site of several serious injuries over the years. Still, with the growing use of wearable technology in investigations, standard protocol in such cases now included reviewing any devices the victims or witnesses might have been wearing. Lena's smartwatch, a sleek model she used daily for fitness tracking and health monitoring, had been taken into evidence along with Eric's, whose battery had died shortly after the time of his death. But no one expected the devices to offer much insight until a technician began analyzing the time-stamped data. The first thing that stood out was Lena's heart rate. From the moment she claimed Eric fell, there was an odd calm reflected in her biometrics. Normally, in traumatic moments, especially one involving witnessing a loved one's fatal accident, heart rates spike, sometimes to dangerous levels. But Lena's heart rate had barely changed in the minutes surrounding the alleged fall. In fact, it stayed steady, almost unnaturally so, until about 45 minutes later, when it spiked sharply and erratically. This spike aligned not with the moment she said Eric fell, but with the time she was near the ranger's station reporting the accident. It was the first major red flag. Then there was her movement data. The GPS on her smartwatch tracked her steps and location with surprising precision. According to the recorded data, Lena didn't follow a direct path back to the trailhead after Eric's fall. Instead, she had lingered near the cliff's edge for nearly half an hour. Her steps showed a series of repetitive movements, pacing back and forth in a small radius. At one point, her elevation dropped significantly, consistent with descending part of the cliff. Then, after roughly 27 minutes, she began moving again, but in a direction that didn't align with the trail path she claimed to have taken. It was clear from the GPS trace that she had wandered off the main trail, doubling back on her own route multiple times before finally heading toward the ranger station. Investigators began to compare the digital map of her movements against the physical terrain of Bear Creek Trail. Something wasn't adding up. Her path wasn't the panicked sprint of someone trying to find help. It looked measured, controlled, calculated even. Furthermore, while Lena told officers she had dropped her backpack in the chaos and only carried her phone while searching for help, the motion data showed her wrist continuously lifting and lowering in a pattern consistent with someone interacting with a device, potentially deleting messages or manipulating content. That interaction lasted a full 5 minutes near the site of Eric's fall. Forensic experts now became more deeply involved. The team extracted metadata from both Lena's smartwatch and the synced phone, revealing a deletion log. Several files and messages were removed between 2:00 and 2:30 p.m., the exact window of time between Eric's fall and Lena's decision to leave the site. These deletions had been partially overwritten by system processes, but fragments revealed portions of a recent call history and a GPS pin sent to an unknown contact labeled only by a nickname, C. While the full messages couldn't be recovered, it was clear that something had been erased, something Lena didn't want anyone to see. At this stage, the sheriff's office wasn't ready to accuse Lena of anything. After all, circumstantial evidence doesn't equal guilt. But the facts were now stacking up in an unusual way. Her calm biometric response, erratic path, interaction with her device, and deleted content all painted a portrait of someone who wasn't behaving like a panicked spouse who had just witnessed a horrific accident. With quiet urgency, detectives compiled a list of Lena's recent communications and financial activity. If there was a reason behind what happened on that trail, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. And as the investigation widened, the cracks in her story began to stretch wider, soon enough to break everything apart. The sheriff's office decided to dig deeper into Lena Dalton's recent past. With the smartwatch data raising serious concerns, detectives requested a full digital forensic sweep of both Lena and Eric's devices: laptops, tablets, phones, cloud storage. They also pulled financial records, travel logs, and social media activity. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. Lena's social accounts were filled with curated content from hikes, product reviews for outdoor gear, and motivational posts. Eric's was far less active, mostly technical articles and the occasional photo of Lena or their dog Milo. But as analysts examined Lena's private data, a different image began to emerge, one not seen by the outside world. It started with a series of encrypted messages recovered from a hidden folder in a cloud backup. Lena had been using a third-party messaging app that auto-deleted conversations after viewing. Investigators found remnants of messages, traces that remained even after deletion, between Lena and someone identified only as Cameron. The tone of the messages was intimate. Some included location pins, like the one matching the coordinates near the cliff's edge. One string of messages stood out for its urgency and timing. 2 days before Eric's death, Lena had sent a message reading, "It's almost done. After this weekend, everything changes." Another, from the day of the hike, simply said, "Today, be ready." This was no ordinary friend. A search of Lena's call records and license plate scans showed that a car registered to Cameron Boyd had been in the vicinity of Bear Creek Trail multiple times in the past month. Cameron was a 32-year-old fitness instructor who had met Lena through a collaboration on her lifestyle brand. He lived across town and had no known connection to Eric. Cameron's social media accounts had been set to private, but a subpoena revealed an archived gallery with images of him and Lena together, some intimate, others taken in familiar locations including Lena's home, the same living room where Eric had hosted his birthday dinner only weeks earlier. Detectives now had a theory forming. Lena and Cameron were involved in a secret relationship, and Eric was the obstacle standing in the way of their future. The financial records confirmed that Lena had recently increased her life insurance policy on Eric. Just 2 months before his death, she had upgraded it to a premium plan worth $750,000, 0 cents, claiming it was to protect them both, in case something happened on their frequent outdoor adventures. The insurance company processed the claim immediately after Eric's death. Lena had not only filed quickly, but she had also done so with a precision that now appeared rehearsed. The autopsy report was re-examined. Initially labeled an accident, the injuries were consistent with a fall, but there were anomalies that hadn't been noticed in the first reading. Eric's wrists had faint bruising, and there were small lacerations on the back of his head, ones that didn't fully align with falling forward onto rocks. A second forensic pathologist noted that some of the bruises looked like defensive wounds. There was also dirt found under Eric's fingernails that didn't match the soil near the base of the cliff, suggesting a struggle had occurred elsewhere. Investigators now began looking at Lena not as a grieving widow, but as a person of interest. Surveillance footage was pulled from highway cameras and traffic lights between Lena's home and the hiking trail. In one clip, her car was followed just minutes behind by a second vehicle, Cameron's dark gray SUV. He hadn't signed in to the trailhead log, and his vehicle had been parked off-road, well out of sight. GPS pings from his phone placed him in the forest that same afternoon, though he later claimed he was simply out for a run nearby. Piece by piece, the timeline grew tighter and the coincidences harder to explain. Lena had motive, opportunity, and a likely accomplice. She had gone to great lengths to paint the perfect picture of an accident, but as investigators connected her digital footprints to financial incentives, deleted messages, and surveillance footage, her web of lies began to unravel. It was no longer a question of whether Eric's fall was an accident. The evidence was stacking into a narrative of premeditation. All that remained was to prove how it happened and to find out if Cameron had played a more direct role in what was beginning to look like murder. Cameron Boyd was brought in for questioning quietly, without the media catching wind. The investigators wanted to keep their progress under wraps. At first, he was calm and confident, even a little smug. He denied any involvement in Eric Dalton's death and downplayed his relationship with Lena. He claimed they had only met a few times to collaborate on social media content, insisting there was nothing romantic between them. But when detectives presented the metadata from their encrypted messages, the photos from his private archive, and the evidence placing him at Bear Creek on the same day as the incident, his demeanor shifted. He asked for a lawyer. With Cameron now lawyered up, the investigators turned their attention back to Lena. They knew the pressure had to come from another angle. They served a warrant on her home and vehicle. From the trunk of her SUV, forensic teams pulled soil samples that matched the mineral composition from the ledge area of Bear Creek. The most damning evidence came from her hiking boots, which had been oddly clean considering the muddy trail conditions on the day of Eric's death. Forensic analysis revealed that the soles had been recently scrubbed, and inside the treads were fibers consistent with clothing, likely from Eric's jacket. This suggested that there had been a physical altercation. The reconstructed timeline told a chilling story. Lena and Eric had driven to the trail early in the morning, with no indication of trouble. Along the hike, Lena's smartwatch showed a drastic decrease in her heart rate and movement activity shortly before noon, possibly when they stopped to rest or when she began enacting her plan. The pattern of her steps suggested she had led Eric off the main path to a narrow ledge, one rarely used, with no railings or safety barriers. Based on the drop and trajectory of Eric's fall, it was determined that he had not simply slipped. His body had landed far enough from the cliffside to indicate force. He was pushed. The second forensic review confirmed that his wounds were inconsistent with a clean fall. There were bruises on his arms, shaped like hands. He had likely tried to brace himself or resist. Investigators now had a working theory. Lena lured Eric to the cliff under the pretense of a photo or rest break, waited for the right moment, and shoved him. The delayed heart rate spike on her smartwatch came not when Eric fell, but later, when she approached the ranger station, possibly when adrenaline and stress finally set in from orchestrating the cover-up. Insurance investigators joined the case. The unusually large policy Lena had taken out on Eric had flagged their attention too. It was a high-tire plan, and she had listed herself as the sole beneficiary. The timing raised red flags. She filed the claim only hours after the accident, submitting digital copies of the paperwork through a pre-filled form on her tablet. Everything had been done with chilling efficiency. She knew exactly what documents to provide, what terms to cite, and how to word her explanation to avoid further inquiry. Despite all the circumstantial evidence pointing to premeditation, the legal team knew they needed something concrete to tie both Lena and Cameron to the act. That came when a data recovery expert found an auto backup of Cameron's phone that had been missed earlier. It included a voice memo dated just 2 days before Eric's death. In it, Cameron's voice could be heard saying, "Once he's gone, everything changes. We just have to make it look right. You do your part, and I'll do mine." This was the breakthrough. Cameron had implicated himself in a conversation that, while vague, confirmed a joint plan. Investigators now suspected that Cameron had been waiting along a side path near the trail and had assisted Lena in covering up evidence or providing instructions. GPS data placed him at a small lookout point, just minutes away from the ledge where Eric fell, during the exact window of the event. He may not have pushed Eric, but he knew what was happening. With this new piece of evidence, arrest warrants were issued for both Lena and Cameron. Lena was picked up during a morning jog in her neighborhood, visibly shocked to see the squad cars roll up in silence. Cameron was taken into custody outside his gym. Both were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. The once tragic tale of a hiking accident had been completely rewritten. Now, the public wanted answers and justice. The trial of Lena Dalton and Cameron Boyd began 9 months after their arrests. By then, the media had turned the case into a national spectacle. The idea that a man could be murdered in broad daylight on a hiking trail and the truth uncovered only because of a smartwatch fascinated the public. Every detail of the case, from the secretly recorded voice memo to the insurance policy filed within hours of Eric Dalton's death, had gripped audiences across the country. The prosecution was confident they had enough to convince a jury, but Lena had hired one of the top criminal defense attorneys in the state, and Cameron's legal team argued he was merely a pawn in a woman's manipulative scheme. In court, Lena maintained her innocence, her demeanor carefully controlled. She appeared dressed modestly, showing no signs of the bold social media influencer persona that had once defined her public image. Her defense painted her as a grieving widow, unfairly targeted by ambitious investigators and betrayed by a man she barely knew. Her lawyer argued that there was no direct evidence placing her hands on Eric during the fall. They claimed the bruises and wounds could have resulted from an accidental tumble down a jagged slope. Cameron, they insisted, was merely a friend she had confided in after the tragedy. But the prosecution had built a detailed and damning timeline. They called on expert witnesses who explained how Lena's smartwatch had tracked her every move. They showed how her heart rate, movement, and GPS location didn't align with someone reacting to an unexpected accident, but instead someone who had calmly orchestrated and executed a deadly plan. The forensic expert testified again about the force and angle of Eric's fall, reinforcing that he had been pushed, not tripped. Photographs from the cliff were shown to the jury, including the ledge where Lena had led Eric and the steep, dangerous drop beyond it. The most compelling evidence was the digital trail. Lena and Cameron had deleted messages, but fragments recovered from cloud backups painted a clear picture of their relationship and intentions. Financial records showed the sudden increase in Eric's life insurance policy. And then came the voice memo, Cameron's own words, recorded just days before the incident. The courtroom fell silent when it was played aloud. In that moment, all ambiguity vanished. The jury could hear the premeditation in his voice, the certainty of a plan already in motion. Cameron's team scrambled to shift blame, now arguing that Lena had manipulated him emotionally, made promises she never intended to keep, and lured him into an ill-conceived fantasy of a life together. But their attempts to portray him as naive faltered when the prosecution revealed that Cameron had deleted location data from his phone shortly after Eric's death and had searched for trail maps and off-path access points in the days prior. His presence on the trail at the same time as Lena and Eric, without signing into the logbook, sealed his role as a willing accomplice. When Lena took the stand, she was composed, even tearful at times. But cross-examination exposed inconsistencies in her account. She claimed she hadn't seen Cameron for weeks before the hike, yet GPS and traffic camera data contradicted her. She insisted the insurance policy change was Eric's idea, but no emails or signed forms supported that story. As her lies unraveled, so too did the image of the innocent widow she tried to portray. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Both Lena Dalton and Cameron Boyd were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Lena was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cameron received a life sentence as well, with parole eligibility after 35 years due to a plea deal offered early in the investigation that he ultimately rejected. The case became a symbol of how technology can unveil even the most carefully hidden crimes. Eric Dalton's smartwatch, a device meant to track steps and heartbeats, had ultimately told the story his voice never could. A simple set of digital data points had exposed deception, unraveled a conspiracy, and brought justice to a man whose only mistake was trusting the person he loved most. As the courtroom emptied and the gavel fell for the final time, the tragedy of Eric's death stood as a sobering reminder. Sometimes the truth is buried in the smallest details, and the coldest hearts hide behind the warmest smiles.